Thank you very much. This probably registered with me, not when I was in the legislature, but when my mother manipulated an address to get me in the 9th grade in another school. And probably when it registered with me, this is like 1967, 1968, is when she manipulated this address to get me in this school. All of a sudden I knew something was different about this particular school. I particularly found that out in the algebra class when the teachers were not playing around and they was very much determined, and I ended up in summer school. But at that time, being the 9th grader, there was no way in my head that I understood the element of choice and options, not in 1967, 1968. Once elected in the legislature in 1980, being a very proud product of the public school system, watching the public school system, the superintendent's daughter went to the local high school I went to. Teachers had their kids going to the public school system. At that time, in my own head, I was basically saying, like, you know, everything seemed like it's moving along. Getting elected in the legislature, over time, parents were beginning to come to me and say that something is wrong with this system. They didn't necessarily say system, they basically talked about schools. And they wanted transfers out of the school. In the case of Philadelphia, politicians played the game of manipulating situations so people could be transferred. I knew that that was not a sustainable process. I knew it was far more complicated than just transferring someone else to another school, and kind of said to myself, this is not the way we should operate. There has to be another way to operate other than going to your local politician, and the politician manipulates, talks to the principal, talks to the superintendent, and then they move the kid out. But in the meantime, what was happening exactly to that particular school? Well, over time, I thought a lot about that, and there's 3 names I want to mention that influenced my thinking a great deal. Obviously, a lot of you mentioned Ted Coldering, and there's no question about Ted. I just saw another good friend walked in the room, is Gene Hickok, which I'll talk a little bit about him, who was Secretary of Education. Howard Fuller, who was from Milwaukee, he was a superintendent, and Paul Hill, who wrote a book called Reinventing Public Education. And then I always love to tell the story about Jeannie Allen and Howard Fuller 20 years ago. Tell this little story for a second. I received this award, invited me down. I didn't know much about the organization, but invited me down. And Howard Fuller and I was in our tuxedos, all dressed up and everything. And I recall Howard Fuller getting up after he had received the award and saying to the audience, which was predominantly white, he said that there's no way you're going to have education reform change if you don't have black people in there. So I thought to myself, I said, Self, this is rather interesting. Howard and I have received this award from this audience in this organization, and Howard came here and told these people that there's no way you're going to have change if you don't have black people. Now, you know, being a politician, I mean, that connects with me. I'm very happy about that. I don't have any problem. He said what he thought. The reason I tell you that story is because I knew that the system needed to be changed, but yet couldn't figure out how to change it as a legislator. Now, you know, education, you know, when you hear people say public education is going to disappear, public education is never going to disappear because it's written in the Constitution. You know, it's written, it says thorough and efficient. That's what it says in the Pennsylvania Constitution. You know, so education has to be provided. The only question is, how is it provided? And as I looked at what Ted Coldering, Howard Fuller, Paul Hill, and others got to talking about, the question was, how can we redefine how education is delivered? How can we redefine it? Tom Ridge is elected in 1994. I have been in the legislature for 14 years. I was the ranking member on the Appropriation Committee, so when Democrats was in charge, I was the chairman of the Appropriation Committee. So obviously I had some influence with Democrats and Republicans, because at the end of the day, they didn't want to piss me off because they had needs. So after I had these discussions with various people, I went to, in 1996, I went to Chicago and met a group called Design for Change. And I looked at Chicago, and it was a superintendent there by the name of Ruth Love. And I went to Chicago while the Democratic Convention was going on, and this is before President Obama was even in the state Senate. He wasn't even in the state Senate in 1996. I went to Chicago. I looked at Chicago. I looked at how the legislature had given the power to the mayor, to run the school system. So I looked at that, and I thought to myself, I talked to Howard Fuller, and Howard had done a lot of research on teachers' unions and things of that nature. I said, why can't we do this in Pennsylvania? So here, remember, when you talk about the support of teachers' union, teachers' union had supported me 1,000%. They had always been with me, but I knew something needed to be changed. So I introduced this legislation, and the Ridge administration had, at that particular time, was pushing vouchers. And I never was a big fan of the aspect of vouchers, but they was pushing it at that particular time. And the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, but they couldn't get their package through. They were stuck. Republicans controlled everything, they couldn't get it through. And my sense is why they couldn't get it through was, you know, everybody looked at education as an inner city problem and a black and a poor people problem. They didn't necessarily look at it as a problem across the board. So they couldn't get it through the House and the Senate. I introduced a package to implode the Philadelphia School District. I said, I'm going to implode the Philadelphia School District, and I want to redefine how education is done. I want to change governance, I want to change management, I want to change recruiting, I want to do everything. Now, there wasn't many people, you imagine, jumped on my bill. It even scared the Republicans. But I said, look, we have to do something. So simultaneously, while the Ridge administration is pushing their initiative, I'm pushing my initiative. And we both are kind of moving down the paths. But the Republicans control the House and they control the Senate, and I'm trying to get my initiative. So, like, they need my help, and I need their help. I need their help to help me on what ultimately became a school takeover, and they needed my help to do charter schools and whatever else they had. I was prepared. Gene Hickok and I developed a very good relationship. He came down to my district. We spent some time talking. That's when I first met, I can't think of the gentleman from Arizona who was head of a charter school. I met him. We spent some time talking. That's when I met Ted Coldering. And then I brought Howard Fuller in. And then really seeing how could we approach this differently. Everybody knew something needed to be changed, but the question was how. So my whole sense was that politics, though educators don't like to talk about it, is at the basis of it all. Politics and power is at the basis of it. And I can't blame teachers' unions for manipulating the system from their perspective if politicians and management want to give them that prerogative. Now, if you give that power to them, they like anybody else, they're going to take that power too. So I said we need to change the power arrangement. And the way to change the power arrangement was to do it through state law. And that's the initiative that I introduced. I introduced the initiative to change the power arrangement. But I didn't stop there. I said, let me start a charter school, which is what I did. It's called West Oak Lane Charter School. It is 16 years old. Check it for yourself. It meets all the test scores. It has 800 kids in there, class size, longer school day, kids wear uniforms, teachers wear uniforms, and it has a union. I wasn't opposed to the idea of union. I just had to explain to them first and foremost that you do not run the school. We run the school. Now, you have a right to be organized, but at the end of the day, there's a performance-based contract. Teachers are under performance-based contract. They all understand fully that nobody benefits. Nobody. You don't benefit, the kids don't benefit at the end of the day if we implode this school. School just opened 3 weeks ago, 16 years old, never had a problem from the union, never. Now, the union thought they was being smart because they figured they would organize against me. And they figured, we said, we're not going to stand in your way. You're going to organize, but you're going to understand it's not going to be the kind of contract that the Philadelphia School District has. The contract is thinner. It's less requirements. Now, I learned that from watching what Howard talked about in terms of Milwaukee, and it only deals with salary and benefits. That's what the contract deals with. Contract doesn't deal with anything. Doesn't deal with school day, school year, classroom, nothing whatsoever. The management of the school runs that. That's exactly what we do in West Philadelphia. Now, the question is, how do you take that to scale? That is a challenging issue. It's a challenging issue how you take it to scale, because I can point to West Oak Lane. And it's interesting on this day that I'm here that the Philadelphia School District, just in the news today, they released Pennsylvania worst schools. Philadelphia has half of the schools in Philadelphia. Secondly, the Pew Foundation just did a poll that showed that the public opinion of charter schools, 64% believe that charter schools are a great education option in the city of Philadelphia. The second part of the statistic that came out, only 26% believe that you're taking away money from the public school system in the city of Philadelphia. So 64% of the people believe it's a great education option. There are now 80 charter schools in the city of Philadelphia, 80 charter schools. Now, let me say this to you. Some are good and some are bad. And what do I think for the future? I think that we had to change the way education is delivered. One of the things I think that Ted and Howard both talked about is this public open sector that you have to have, and Deb McGriff just said it, you have to have this option open and available, right? And it is that force of competition in the system that brings that tension. Now, if I didn't have Tom Ridge and didn't have Hickok, to be honest with you, we wouldn't have been able to do what we did because a Democrat wouldn't have done it. Let me be clear. I'm a Democrat, and I know full well in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a Democrat would not have done it. But Ridge and Hickok wouldn't have been done if there wouldn't have been a Democrat forming an alliance with them. So you needed a Democrat and a Republican to basically redefine how public education is delivered. In closing, no, we are not where we need to be because there are some bad charters and there are some good charters. But we have changed what I consider the mindset for parents and kids to understand the element of choice. And that they have to understand, particularly poor folks, they have to understand that they too can have choice, because it shouldn't be a question of those who just have power and money who have choice. Choice should be an element if it is done and conducted in a way that people are truly informed. That's why I want to thank Jeannie Allen for not giving up on this organization. You know, she and I have had our big debates over the years, and I do agree with her, there should be more authorizers. I agree with that. But the politics, because I agree with what you said, even though Republicans talk about market-based, my experience is they're no more different than over-regulating the Democrats. Because in Pennsylvania right now, we have a situation where the Republicans want to over-regulate charter schools, cyber charter schools. They want to take money from them. They want to over-regulate. Gene, you would be disappointed. I know he's there. You'd be disappointed in the Republicans control the House and the Senate in Harrisburg and the Republican governor. And they are trying to over-regulate charter schools. And I said to myself, what happened to that philosophy about it's in the interest of the consumer in the marketplace? I would argue they are in the pockets of school boards. See, you talk about unions. I would argue that the Republicans are in the pocket of the school boards. Because understand something, being in the pocket of the school boards is being in the pocket of patronage, because that's where jobs come from. So people want to talk about the unions, talk about how those school boards are basically stopping competition, because they don't want no competition. They basically said, well, aren't we doing a good job with just your kids? Well, no, you may not be. You're not giving us any choice. So that's something important to understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dwight.